my screen. I can't see the WebEx, so I'll just ask you folks to put in the chat if you can see the slides, okay? Okay, so right now you should be seeing the Climate Smart page, and right now you should be seeing my slides.
Yep, we can see them.
Yes? Okay, perfect. Okay, wonderful. So let's get started. 2025 Climate Smart Communities Grants Program. For anyone who isn't all that familiar with the grants program, it was created back in 2016. And the idea was to help New York State municipalities complete projects that are focused on greenhouse gas mitigation and climate change adaptation, as well as supporting the planning and inventory and assessments that need to happen before you can do implementation projects through the Climate Smart Community Certification Program. Eligible applicants are municipalities, and we define municipalities as counties, cities, towns, and villages of the state of New York. Other entities can participate as part of a partnership with a municipal lead applicant, but that does require a formal partnership agreement in most cases, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Municipalities do not need to be registered or certified in the Climate Smart Community Certification Program to apply. Municipalities that are certified or registered do get a few extra points in the application, so there is a little bit of a benefit, but it is not necessary. We've had plenty of municipalities who aren't certified get awards in previous years. This year we have $22 million available. That is both EPF funds and Environmental Bond Act funds, so it is all state funding. I've gotten a lot of questions lately about, do we have federal funding and is that going to affect our grants? And this program is entirely state funded, so no worries about the craziness with the grant funding at the federal level going on right now. 21 million of that is going to be for our implementation projects. That would be the adaptation and greenhouse gas mitigation projects. And new for this year, we have an engineering feasibility studies category. I'll talk about that in more detail later. And then we have 1 million available for certification actions. That would be those planning, inventory, and assessment actions. We do have a match requirement. It is based on the total project cost. It's either 50% or 20% of eligible project costs. And there are a few different criteria that will tell you if you're a 50% or a 20% municipality. And we'll also get into that a little bit more detail on future slides. Federal and state funds cannot be used as match. So that's basically all federal and all state funds. So, nothing from NYSERDA, nothing that came from the feds at all, even if it's a pass through your county, it's not eligible. DC always looks at the original origin of the funds, and that's how they determine if it's federal or not. Land value is also eligible as match for an implementation project. The parcel must be in municipal ownership at the time of application, and it must have an appraisal. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a future slide.
Hey, Myra, we have a question about land value.
Okay, let's hold on that one until we get to the land value slide.
Okay.
That might answer the question. Okay. Match requirements for implementation projects. If your project and all of your project components are located in a disadvantaged community census tract, that project has a 20% match. Doesn't matter what your median household income is, doesn't matter what your New York State OSC environmental stress score is. If it's in a disadvantaged community census tract and it's taking place there and all the components are taking place there, it's a 20% match. In our RFA, in one of the attachments in the back is a step-by-step that tells you how to use the DEC's info locator to determine whether or not your project is in one of those census tracts. And if it is, you're going to have to upload 2 maps. So be sure to screenshot the map of your community and where all the DAC census tracts are within your community, and then also where your project is within that disadvantaged community census tract. The second option for getting a 20% match is if your municipality appears on the Office of the State Comptroller's environmental score list, and it has a designation of significant environmental stress, moderate environmental stress, or susceptible environmental stress. Again, attached to the RFA is a list basically that tells you if your there or not. The other option for getting a 20% match is if the municipal applicant has a 2019 to 2023 median household income of less than or equal to 67,662 per the census table B19013. And again, there is a step-by-step in the RFA that tells you how to determine the MHI for your municipality. Excuse me. Now, I will say that census website keeps changing. So every time I go in there to test it, I have to do it slightly differently. So if you're having any kind of trouble following the step-by-step, you could give us a call or send us an email and we can help you along with that. So if none of those things apply, then the match is a 50% match. For a certification project, if the municipal applicant appears on that OSC environmental stress score list, the match is 20%. And if the municipal applicant has a median household income less than or equal to 67,662 for the census table, that is a 20% match. If none of those apply, then the match is 50%. Okay. There's been some confusion between the two, so I just want to make sure it's clear that if you're an implementation project, you have one set of criteria, and if you're a certification project, you have another. Okay, here we go. Land value as match. So the land value is the land value. It's not the amount that you paid for the land. It's not how much, it doesn't matter how you paid for the land. What matters is the value. So that's why we ask for an appraisal that has been done within a year of the application date. And because you might have purchased this property, I don't know, the municipality might have purchased it, I don't know, 30 years ago for $20,000 and now it's worth 50, right? So it's that, because it's now worth 50, you can get, anywhere from 0 to 50% or $50,000 is your match. And that also works vice versa. So if you paid $50,000 for it 20 years ago and now it's only worth 20, you can get up to $20,000 in match value from the land. And the project that you're doing has to be an adaptation or mitigation project, and the land has to be critical to completing that project. We can't allow for purchasing of land just for plain open space value. The other thing to be aware of is we do want a map that identifies the property. Please include the section, block, and lot number and adjacent roadways so we can actually identify it. And then part of your requirements in your contract is to add the notice of grant language to the deed, and then recording that deed and title, and then giving us a copy of that. Okay, now Jenna, I know you said there was a question about the land value.
Yes, it was, how do you consider land value for projects in the right of way rather than a parcel?
Projects can't be in a right of way. The community has to own the land outright. I mean, if there's a right of way on top of the land that you own, we're going to have to probably do that on a case-by-case basis. So depending on what your project is, does your project have to be in the right of way? Does it not have to be in the right of way? That's one of those things where we would need more information. So what you're going to want to do is email us at cscgrants@dec.ny.gov, and that will be on one of these later slides, all our contact information, and just give us more specifics and details. In some cases we do have to consult with Lands and Forests and or our council's office to figure out what the answer is. Thanks, Jenna. Jenna put it in the chat, the email. Thank you. Okay. So moving on to calculating match, there's been some confusion about this in the past, and I'm hoping to alleviate this a little bit. So if you have a 50-50 match, that's easy. It's just 50% of your total project cost, right? So if you have $1 million project, you're going to ask for $500,000 in grant, and you're going to show us that you have $500,000 in match. The 20% match gets a little bit more complicated. So for that same $1 million project, you're going to apply for an $800,000 grant, and you have to show us that you have $200,000 in match. If you wanted to apply for the maximum $2 million award, you need to show us that your total project cost is $2.5 million. So $2 million of that's going to be a grant, and $500,000 is going to be match. And if you have project costs that are very high, that go completely beyond what we can pay for, as in, climate smart community grants paying for a very small part of a larger project, you do want to tell us what you want us to pay for and also what the bigger project is. So say it was a $4 million project. You want $2 million from our grant, you have to show a $500,000 match, but you also have to tell us where the other 1.5 is coming from. Okay, so it needs to be really clear that that match is match and that 500,000 doesn't include any money from other sources, because this is where you get into, you could be mixing federal funds to do a bigger project and federal funds can't be matched. So we have to keep it all straight. And this is the reason why we have you complete a budget within the actual CFA, and then we have a budget template that we want you to upload. So that budget template that we want you to upload should just be the grants and the match for the Climate Smart grant. And the work plan should just be what work that money is covering. So if you were going for a $2 million grant and you had to show us 2.5 in total project cost, you would want that template to detail the 2.5. In the CFA budget, you're going to tell us about the remaining 1.5 and where those funds are coming from. I hope that makes sense. Yes, okay. And also, I'm trying to get our IT folks to allow us to add an Excel document to our webpage. I don't know if that's going to work, but we do have an Excel document that will calculate the match for you. So you can, if you want a copy of that, you can also email us here and we will send you a copy of it. So it's one attempt to make this calculation a little bit simpler for all of you. Okay, eligible and ineligible expenses. Eligible expenses include personnel services, contractual services, equipment purchase or rental. Can include municipal equipment, but it can only be in kind, and you must use FEMA or DOT rates when you price that out in your budget. So be sure in your budget to tell us whether you used FEMA or DOT and what year of DOT. The DOT list is quite old as far as I understand, and FEMA's isn't all that updated either. But that's what we got. Supplies and materials, which are your consumables. Volunteer time and DPS are eligible expenses. You just got to know up front that if you're going to use volunteer time or donated professional services or personnel time, you have to keep time logs. They have to be signed by a supervisor because you have to prove to us that these people actually worked when they said they did and that somebody was supervising them and can vouch for that. And volunteer time, again, can't be, excuse me, if the person that's volunteering is volunteering outside their area of expertise, they can only charge minimum wage. So if you have a lawyer who's working on your comp plan, but they're just kind of, setting up tables and helping with the meetings, that's not really worth $250 an hour. That would be a minimum wage. But if that same lawyer was actually reviewing your zoning ordinance as a donated professional services or as a volunteer, then they could use their regular standard professional rate. Excuse me, sorry, my allergies are I'm very unhappy with the ragweed, so I'm going to keep doing that. Land acquisition we already talked about, and a new eligible expense this year is alternative energy systems and equipment. So we'll get into more detail about that in a bit. Our ineligible costs haven't changed all that much. No salt storage sheds. Generators have to be powered by means other than fossil fuels, and they have to be part of a larger adaptation project. No indirect or overhead costs, no salaries or expenses of elected officials, no fundraising expenses, no taxes, no insurance, no fines, no deficit funding, no bond interest, and no associated fees, and also no contingency costs. We all know contingency costs always come with any kind of construction project. But what you want to do for your budget is basically just wrap it into the construction or maybe some of it in the engineering. But just keep in mind, we do have a cap of 15% of what the grant can pay for when it comes to engineering costs for a project.
And Myra, we have a couple more questions coming in.
Okay.
The first one is, why does volunteer time as match utilize the minimum wage rather than something like the independent sector value, which is valued considerably higher? Is it possible to argue for the use of the independent sector value, or could that be something considered in the future rounds? For context, New York State minimum wage outside of New York City is $15.50, while
The answer is no. That came from our counsel's office. So legally, no, we can't do that. That was their decision. So I don't have much say over that one, but that's the reason, because we tried using that at first and we kind of got our hands slapped a little bit. So no.
Okay. And the next question is, do we need to provide resumes for staff that provide in-kind services? Can personnel fringe benefits count towards the matching funds? Are there restrictions on the fringe overhead?
Staff, as long as they're staff that are hired actual municipal staff, you don't need to provide anything. You need their title and you need to put their hourly or actually their annual wage inside the budget. And what I would do is I always advocate for taking the fringe amount, adding it to their base salary and making that the annual salary, because you have to do all these calculations to make the comptroller's office happy in the contracting document. And it's just much easier if you roll everything together into one number and do it by 1 year, 12 months, 2 years, or keep it even. Don't do something weird like 18 months or 16 months, because the numbers are going to drive you crazy. They drive us crazy. They drive everybody crazy. So my suggestion is to wrap the fringe into the annual salary, make that the annual salary, and then always say the person's going to work for a year or 2 years or 3 years, never anything other than an even amount, because it makes the numbers a little bit easier. And once you get into contracting, you'll see what I'm talking about.
I have two more questions that came in.
Okay.
Can this grant fund the completion of a climate resiliency plan with a focus on flooding? If our village was unable to complete the plan with a prior DOS grant, we are about 80% complete.
Not likely. This round of grants, the contract start date is going to be March 15th of 2026. So it doesn't seem likely, number one. Number two, you have to meet all of the requirements of the certification action, which we will talk about once we get to the certification program. And I mean, if it's 80% done, it might not meet all the requirements, and then you'd have to go back and potentially do extra work to meet requirements. So
The next question is, do electric vehicle charging stations, either level 2 or DC fast charging, count as alternative energy equipment?
no, not for this program. This program, you can't install chargers or EVs. You have to use our municipal ZEV program. So if you just Google New York State DEC Climate Smart Communities grants, it'll take you right to our grants page. And there's a link on the left for our ZEV programs. So if you click on that link, it'll bring you down to our ZEV programs. And we do have funding for those again. So I'm hoping to get those out before October. We'll see if that happens. But that's what I'm hoping for. We have both a rebate program for municipalities who purchase EVs, and then we also have a grant program for installing level 2s and DC fast charge.
I have two more questions that came in. We recently completed a natural resource inventory using funding from the Mohawk River Watershed Program. That process identified improvements, including signage and entry improvements to the town-owned hiking trails inside town-owned forests as an action item. Would an NRI action item be eligible for this grant?
I don't know, probably not is my sense, but I want you to send me an email and give me more details, please.
Okay, and last question is, would misting stations that are deployed during heat events be an eligible use of this grant?
Probably. I'm not sure if you're going to get to the minimum project cost, which we'll talk about in a second. So It's potential. It is a potential. We did have some conversations with another community that wanted to put in spray parks. So, you know, that one would definitely hit the minimum grant award. So not quite sure about the misting, maybe if it's part of a bigger project. Okay, let's move on to our projects since we're already talking about them. All right, the first project type is mitigation. So this is basically greenhouse gas emissions, mostly outside the power sector per our statutory regulations. Minimum grant amount is 50,000, max is 2 million, and we have that 15% cap on engineering and design. So this could be your projects such as reducing VMT, organic waste, doing refrigerant management, and renewable energy projects. So let's talk about these a little bit. Reducing vehicle miles traveled. This is where you get into on-road or off-road facilities for non-motorized transportation. So that could be biking, it could be walking, it could be trails, it could be lanes, it could be sidewalks. The idea is that it meets daily needs. You know, these facilities don't even really have to be paved. You could do a stone dust trail. The idea is the crux is the serving the daily needs. The idea is to get people out of their cars and get them using something else. So you want them to be able to get from the housing development to the work center, from the work center to the commercial center, without having to drive everywhere. So think maybe biking from your home to your workplace, from your workplace to the pharmacy, from the pharmacy to the grocery store, and the grocery store back home, that kind of thing. Mass transit improvements are also part of this, whether it's bus or rail or bikes or car sharing or transportation demand management. And there's also potential to fund a project that reduces distance commuted, such as densification, smart growth, carpooling, etc. Reducing organic waste. This is basically to prevent food waste and reduce the volume of food that is getting into the landfill where it produces methane. Methane is one of the most powerful greenhouse gases and is quite a big problem. And this is one of the easiest ways to deal with it. So this could be something like a regional food composting facility that could potentially be mixed with a yard waste composting facility. Could also potentially be vermicomposting. It's an option. Could be food donation programs. It could be a food waste pickup or drop-off program or sites throughout your community. And another potential is anaerobic digestion at a wastewater treatment plant. Refrigerants. Okay, this is where things get a little bit complicated. So if you want to replace an entire existing refrigeration system with a system that uses natural refrigerants such as ammonia, carbon dioxide, propane, water, or air, that is great. You can convert an existing refrigeration system to a system that uses natural refrigerants. You can establish a municipal or community disposal program or both so that actual refrigerants are disposed of properly and not released into the air. You can do a project to adopt codes that will enable the use of alternative refrigerants in your communities. You know, there's a lot of concerns about them, and sometimes your codes folks are the best ones to talk to about how to make it work. There's also the potential of adopting new regulations or incentives or programs that ensure proper monitoring, repair, and disposal, and that could be at both at the municipal level or at a community-wide level. And one thing I will note is that your variable refrigerant flow and variable refrigerant volume systems are not eligible. This is where you get into some of your, a lot of your heat pumps. You know, they have a lot of joints and the joints leak a lot. So that's the concern with them. You know, something like a geothermal heat pump won't really have that problem because it's using air mostly as its refrigerant. So if you want to replace a system, like if you wanted to replace an air conditioning system in a town hall, that town hall was not acting as some other adaptation project, like it wasn't your cooling center or something, you have to use natural refrigerants in that type of project. Okay, I just want to make that clear. Another thing that you need to know about refrigerants is that New York did adopt the amendments to what's called Part 494. It's our hydrofluorocarbon standards. regulation. It's basically phasing down climate disrupting refrigerants to meet emissions requirements per the Climate Act. So basically every year there are certain refrigerants that are no longer allowed to be sold in New York. You will not be able to install them as part of your project. So this is, I mean, any project, actually, not just our projects, but any building project throughout the state. So this is kind of for your awareness. The first link there is the link to the express terms, which is all the details and all of the legal language. And if your municipality has equipment that contains more than 50 pounds of refrigerant, you may be required to report under this act. So the second link will take you to the reporting section that gives you a little more information about if you need to report. So if you have, you know, an ice rink system that's big enough to have to report, potentially if you have a large county building with air conditioning that uses more than 50 pounds of refrigerant, you might have to do reporting under this act. So that is an FYI for all of you. I am not the refrigerant expert, but if you do have questions on refrigerants, you can send them to us and we'll get in touch with our folks on the other side of the office in mitigation and see if we can get an answer for you. Okay, renewable energy projects. This is the one that's getting all of the attention this year. Technically, our statute says we have to fund renewable energy projects in municipally owned public low-income housing. The fact that there is not a whole lot of municipally owned public low-income housing makes it hard for us to actually be able to fund any of those projects. So we decided to kind of look at our definition of outside the power sector and tweak it a little bit. So now we're going to allow, you know, renewable energy equipment to be eligible expenses. So if you want to put solar panels on top of your DPW or a wind turbine on top of your fire department, those would all now be eligible. Again, heat pumps projects has to meet requirements of Part 494 if you are using a refrigerant, aka if it's not geothermal. And the caveat here is that because we can only fund projects outside of the power sector, these projects can't be returning energy to the grid for sale. So there was a whole lot of questions about what this actually means in our last webinar, and we basically clarified it to the point that, you know, if you put solar panels on, I mean, you have options. You can store the excess energy in batteries in the facility for future use. If you're net metered, that's okay. We're not going to hold that against you, especially if you're getting credits for other buildings within your, you know, your portfolio. However, you will have to report how much energy, excess energy you're creating and how much is going back to the grid, because if it gets too high, we might be getting into this, you know, inside the power sector area. So also planning the project, knowing how much energy you need and not overbuilding for more than that's an option as well. Questions on that one? We had lots of questions on that one last time. Oh, okay, great. Okay, adaptation projects. All right, so same grant, 50,000 minimum, 2 million maximum, 15% cap on engineering. This is where you're getting into projects such as increasing or preserving natural resilience, reducing your flood risk, replacing right sizing or removing flow barriers, and your extreme heat and extreme event preparation. So natural resilience could be a whole lot of things. It could be a living shoreline. It could be a floodplain restoration. It could be a floodplain bench. It could be the creation of a wetland. It could be the creation of a dune. It could be restoration of a beach. It really kind of depends what you've got going on in your location and what the needs are. The biggest idea is that you're using natural systems to reduce risk and or vulnerability to an asset or to contribute to flood control and alleviation. Reduction of flood risk, this is another one that can be all sorts of different projects. It could be a retrofitting or a flood proofing of a facility that can't be moved, like a water treatment plant that you might not be able to just pick up and move out the floodplain. It could be replacing or right sizing or removing bridges or culverts or other flow barriers. It could be the relocation of a critical municipal facility, such as, you know, a fire department or your town hall or your emergency center, your cooling center, etc. The idea is that you're reducing risk to an asset, or you're facilitating response or protection of a population or population center. Extreme heat or extreme event preparation, again, can vary widely. This is where we get into cooling centers, permanent shade structures. Another extreme heat potential is a comprehensive tree planting program where you're planting trees throughout your community. You have a plan for maintenance and monitoring of those trees. It could be emergency warning systems for floods or hurricanes or heat, whatever it is you've got going on in your location, and also emergency preparedness or response programs. And here's another caveat about refrigerants. So typically, if you're going to replace a refrigeration system, we want you to use natural refrigerants. However, if you're doing something like a cooling center or a facility location, in that instance, we will allow you to use a regular refrigerant. However, there are caveats. We still prefer, if you're doing a facility location, rebuilding a new building, that you put in natural refrigerants or renewable energy. But if it is, if it's not always possible in every situation, right? So in this case, the equipment has to be the lowest GWP refrigerant available. You're going to have to tell us what that refrigerant is when you apply, and we will cross-check it. And if, things change between when you apply and when you actually build the facility, that's going to have to be taken into account. Equipment that's not using natural refrigerants must have a refrigerant management plan. That refrigerant management plan must include an end-of-life disposal plan for the equipment and the refrigerants. And you also have to have leak monitoring, detection, and repair plan. And all of those items will be part of your contract. Any unsealed refrigerant equipment must have a leak detection system. Again, there's the links to the Part 494 express terms for your information. Okay, the other thing I will mention is that flood projects, anything involving flooding, culverts, bridges, stormwater systems, they have to be designed for future flows, whether that's sea level rise, flood volume, or precipitation. At minimum, the calculations have to include the guidelines that are included in the New York State Flood Risk Management Guidance. So for sea level rise, that's its own thing, but typically for precipitation or flood volume, depending on what part of the state you're in, you're either adding 20% or you're adding 10%. Obviously, if you have local information that tells you something more specific, or if that number is higher, please use that. You want to use any information you might have from local universities or nonprofits or environmental organizations that might be tracking weather and data. Some of you might have a USGS gauging station that you can access data from to make those decisions. So per the guidance that is linked here, DEC's guidance for the review of bridge and culvert projects in non-tidal waters requiring a protection of waters permit and a water quality certificate. That will get deeper into it, but these are the main highlights. So if your culvert or your bridge is in a waterway and it's got an internal opening of over 20 feet, the idea is that it should pass a 100-year flood plus the climate change multiplier. Bridges have to have 2 feet of freeboard when passing the flows from a 50-year storm plus climate change multiplier. Culverts, 4-sided box culverts, bridges that are smaller than 20 feet. The idea is that they pass a 50-year flood plus the climate change multiplier. Box culverts and culverts must provide at least 2 feet of roadway freeboard above the 50-year elevation and be able to pass a 100-year flow plus the climate change multiplier without overtopping the roadway. So this is the guidance. This is what we're going to look for in most cases. Some of you are going to be very urban and very developed and are going to have a hard time meeting these requirements. So what you're going to want to do is you still have to look at future flows, and you have to look at where you probably have to look up in your watershed, up the watershed, to see where else you could do something that could help store the water, move the water, give it a place to sit, etc. So just because you can't meet this exactly doesn't mean you're 100% out, but this is the goal essentially. If you're doing a stormwater conveyance system, that can be designed to carry the greatest possible flow that can be accommodated by the location, including the climate change multiplier. So a lot of times these piped stormwater systems are in areas that are already very developed, and there's only so much room for pipes of a certain size. So in these cases, again, thinking about the bigger picture of the entire community, where can you attenuate, intercept, and infiltrate stormwater before it flows into your stormwater system? So you want to look at things like swales, where you could put any kind of grassy medians that you've got where you could store water, even bigger projects for the community like rain barrels and rain gardens. Where could you put rain gardens on municipal property, etc. So in certain cases, you end up having to accept a certain amount of flooding in areas where you just don't have the room to put in a bigger stormwater system. Which is okay as long as the community is okay with that, as long as the municipality is okay with that. But the idea is to just start thinking a little bigger and casting a wider net. And then also linked here is the stormwater design manual. Stormwater projects always have to incorporate items from the stormwater design manual. Okay. Our next new project type is the feasibility studies. So we are going to be funding 2 types of feasibility studies in this round. One is for flood mitigation. So inside the RFA is a whole checklist of things that the flood mitigation studies need to meet. Part of that is so that these studies and the Resilient New York studies are basically in parallel. So we're both asking for the same thing. So you could be your project could be eligible for funding from both programs. Again, you have to have the future flows analysis. You've got to have HEC-RAS modeling for both hydraulic and hydraulic. We want you to take a comprehensive watershed-wide or sub-watershed approach. Again, don't just try to put water in pipes and push water onto other people and make it their problem, other communities. We've got to start thinking bigger in terms of how we're dealing with water. We'd like you to prioritize nature-based flood mitigation, provide analysis of alternatives, including a no-action alternative, and then provide a conceptual design for your preferred alternative. The second feasibility study is for refrigerants, for replacing HVAC and refrigerant systems with natural refrigerants. So obviously we want you to look at, is natural refrigerants possible? Can it comply with Part 494? How's it going to provide an actions alternative, again, including no action alternative? Include cost estimates for the alternatives, emission reductions for each alternative, and then touch on the maintenance required because these systems are very new, so they will take some training and getting used to by folks that need to maintain them. Okay. Certification projects. These are the planning and assessments. So grant amount minimum is 10,000, max is 200,000. There are 20 actions available again this year. They're the same actions that were eligible last year. There are minimum requirements for each selected action. They must be completed as part of your project, and you can find them in the Climate Smart Community Certification portal under the subheadings, how to obtain points for this action and what to submit. Here is a screenshot of the certification portal where you can get details on requirements and certification actions, reports from other communities, documentation of what they did. You can also register and apply for certification on this website. And if you click on actions and certification and then go to actions and then click on whatever action you want, it'll open up another window, and inside that window you can find what the requirements are in order to get points for that action and to also be eligible for your grant funds for that action. This is just a list of all of the actions that are available. You got your greenhouse gas inventories, your climate action plans, your fleet inventories. These are the basic sort of fundamental actions. A natural resource inventory, a climate vulnerability assessment, heat emergency plan, the flood insurance program, community rating system. Was also added a few years ago. Okay. No other questions, I assume, Jenna?
Nope, not at the moment.
Okay, great. So I can't stress enough to read the request for applications. It is a big document. There's a lot of information in there, but you do need to know it. You do need to know it. You need to know certain things you apply before you apply and certain requirements that you're going to have for if you get awarded. As you know, the application is through the CFA and it is going to be due July 31st at 4. All right. Preparing your application, work plans and budgets. We talked a little bit about the budget already, but for work plans, we have the, the objective, task, and deliverable type of format. So your objective is going to be your overall goal. Your tasks are going to be the specific things that you have to complete in order to meet that goal, and your performance measure is an actual tangible object that you're going to hand to the state that proves that you did the task. So when you're drafting your work plans, don't make your task some esoteric thing. Like we need something, a document, a photo, we need some type of tangible object. So keep that in mind. Budgets and work plans should align. If you have engineering in your work plan, but you don't have any engineering in your budget or vice versa, that should not happen. If you're talking about engineering in your work plan, you should be including engineering in your budget. And if you have engineering in your budget, you should be having engineering tasks in your work plan. We don't want to see overmatch, so just do the match calculation at the total project cost, the 80-20 or 50-50. Please make sure your match amount is correct. You can always send us an email or email is probably best. Send us an email and we can work with you and check and make sure it's correct. Know that your budget and your CFA budget and your Climate Smart Communities budget template may differ, and that's okay. We already talked about how the CFA budget's the entire project and our template is specifically what Climate Smart funds are going to pay for. And for certification projects, when you're making your work plan and your deliverables, please make sure again to visit the certification portal and check what the requirements are and make sure you're adding those requirements into your work plan, tasks and deliverables.
Ira, we have a couple more questions coming in.
Okay.
The first one is, can you explain how a municipality can partner with a nonprofit to implement the project?
So you would have to decide what your project is, who's doing what, where the dollars are coming from, who's contributing what. So, I mean, gosh, there's like a million examples you could use, but basically you want to know, you want to be clear who's doing what and who's paying for what and who's responsible for what. And that's where your partnership agreement comes in. It basically lays that out. It says town will do A, B, and C, nonprofit will do D, E, and F. Town's putting in $10,000, nonprofits donating $20,000. Town will put in $10,000 more of staff time. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, the next question we have is, I saw under adaptation, extreme heat or extreme event preparation, there was emergency preparedness or response programs. Is there some more guidance or previous examples of projects for that from the County Emergency Management Office? I can think of a ton of things that would be applicable in my mind, like emergency supplies for flooding incidents, drinking water, muck out kits, portable shower capabilities if water sources are impacted, to planning support for disaster debris management, etc., or is it kind of evaluated on a case-by-case basis?
It is basically a case-by-case basis. I mean, the idea is through implementation projects, it's hard to do anything that supports planning. So that's kind of why we have this separate category for the 2 feasibility studies, because we were able to, given the language in our statute, we were able to pull that out. But if you wanted to do, if you needed to buy certain equipment or supplies, you could do that, but you have to explain why you need it in terms of climate change. We don't get a whole lot of applications for this, but we did once get an application for a community that wanted what do they call it, a high water vehicle, but they didn't really explain why they needed it for a climate change reason. You know, obviously there's flooding and they need to get to people. There's no maps, there's no pictures, so you have to really create kind of like a story of what's going on, why you need it, and how that is going to help. How's that going to alleviate your problem?
The next question was, what is the application deadline? But Amanda put in the chat, the deadline is July 31st, 2025 for this round.
A few
And
more
then-
weeks.
Yes. And the next question is, can a municipality provide the funding directly to one or multiple nonprofits? Can the municipality select the nonprofits?
There is no sub-allocation of funds. We don't do sub-allocation of funds. You can hire nonprofits as a contractor and pay them as a contractor to do a certain job for you, but there's sort of no sub-allocating those dollars. As in, hi, we just got this money here, go do something with it. Like, that's too hard for us to track if requirements are being met.
And the last question I have is, will you be sending these slides out to all participants after the webinar?
That's going to be posted on our grants page, just like the previous webinar was. So if you don't have the link to our page, if Amanda or Jenna, you want to put it in the chat, folks can go there and get a copy. There's also, I will say, on the CFA website, there's a section where they post all of the pre-recorded webinars. It's basically a shorter version of this, and you can either download the slides or you can download the or link. It's essentially a link to a YouTube video of the webinar.
We have a couple more questions coming in, Myra.
Okay.
If we are able to complete a project more quickly than the 5-year timeline, can we seek reimbursement on an expedited timeline, or are we restricted to seek reimbursement based on the initial work plan?
You can apply for reimbursements every quarter. You do have to supply proof that you've accomplished something. So you'll have your quarterly reports. Any deliverables that you make will be due at the time that you request a payment. You know, obviously for some projects you have a lot of planning and whatnot up front that you have to do before engineering or something before you get to someplace where you could hand us something. So, you know, once you get up to spending like 50% of your grant, we're going to want to see deliverables.
The next question we have on here is, can a municipality purchase equipment for an eligible scope of work and provide to nonprofit use deploy in the community?
Potentially. It kind of depends what the project is and how the municipality is involved. Like we have a city, I think it was, who purchased equipment and then they're actually leasing that equipment to a nonprofit that's actually doing the composting work. And they have an agreement between the two of them for, you know, the overall composting project as well as use of the equipment. So in that kind of case, that's more structured, so that's okay.
And that was it.
That's it? Okay.
That I can see.
All righty. So we will move on to the next piece. Okay, application preparation. In terms of mitigation projects, again, we want to know what are your emissions currently. You know, if you have a local greenhouse gas emissions inventory, please use the information from that. If you don't, you can use the regional greenhouse gas inventories that were done in 2010, but again, they are getting kind of old. So if you don't have an emissions inventory, We encourage you to apply for the certification action where you can develop your own inventories, both a government operations inventory and a community inventory. We want to know what emissions you're targeting by the project and some kind of quantifiable evidence that demonstrates how the project will achieve a reduction in greenhouse gases. So if you're doing something like a reduction in VMT project, you want to estimate, how much mode share shift you're going to get and how much that mode share shift is going to reduce emissions. Similar for adaptation, like I was kind of just talking about to the person who had the emergency response question, is we kind of want to know how the project is justified in terms of climate conditions. So what's your current climate conditions? What are the anticipated changes? What's your problem now? How's it going to get worse? What are you going to do about it? And how is that, what are you going to do about it, alleviating the problem? Okay, so that's what we look for in an application. How does it reduce risk? How is it going to help people, etc.? Or how's it going to help environment? It could also help a natural resource that you need, like your wellheads or something. All right, for certification projects, since these are planning projects, we're interested in why the project's needed, how it's going to meet a local need, solve a problem, or provide critical information that's missing, sort of like the greenhouse gas inventories. They do a good job of providing information that's missing. How that study is going to lead to implementation projects and that it has reasonable costs. So we do ask, again, and this one asks for a detailed budget. And the thing I will warn folks about is we get communities that are like, we're going to do 10 actions and we're going to do it for $20,000. And a lot of these things take a lot more work and a lot more digging. So just, I love that you're ambitious, but just take a realistic look at the amount of time it's going to take to do these and plan your application and your budget accordingly. Okay, for scoring and evaluation, this is available in the RFA as well. I'll just tell you that the areas that are highlighted in bold are the ones that we pay the most attention to and that have the highest points value. So you'll want to, for implementation, focus on your project criticality, the effectiveness of the proposal, and the reasonableness of cost. And same thing for our certification. Why is it critical? How is it effective? And is it reasonable cost? This is just a screenshot of what's in the request for applications. So if you want to take a look at it and try to score yourselves, it's all there for you. The information has changed from what's on the screen. So please look at the RFA if you want details. This next few slides, I'm not going to go through all of these in depth. It's basically a list of where you might be able to find some climate change data. We've got the New York State Impacts Assessment. We've got sea level rise projections. We've got the natural measures to reduce flood risk and erosion documents. There's another link to that culvert and bridges. Protection of waters permit, really long guidance document. There's the stormwater manual. There's our refrigerant fact sheets. There's heat profiles from the Department of Health. There are some tips on purchasing green sources from OGS. DOS has a lot of coastal risk assessment tools and mapping. They've also got model local laws that might help you. There's the climate mapping for a resilience and adaptation site. The climate friendly cooling campaign. Last I checked, these national assessments were still up. Don't know if they're still up today, but hopefully they're still there. They have some good info as well. And other important information, again, one does not need to be registered or certified Climate Smart Community to apply. We do accept more than one application for different projects. So you could submit 2 certification projects and 2 implementation projects. That's completely fine. We currently don't have a limit on the number of grants that can be open concurrently. We are thinking about potentially implementing this because we do have some communities with a lot of grants and they can't keep up with them all. The program is still reimbursement only. The costs do have to be paid upfront by the grantee and then you bill us for reimbursement. The projects do have a 5-year contract term. Please try to be done within 5-year contract. Things come up, we know this, but do your best. We do have MWBE and SDVOB goals at 30%, 6%. They apply to SDOVB all awards and MWBE all awards of 25,000 or more. If you've been around the program for a minute, you know that in the past we did not apply MWBE to anything that wasn't a construction project over 100,000. That has changed. It's anything over 25,000, you're going to be evaluated for a goal. We do have a land acquisition toolkit on our website. So if you are thinking about purchasing land for a project or doing land value as match, there's a lot of resources on our grants page, and this link will take you there.
Myra, I
SFS.
do have one question.
Okay.
What is the typical timeline between application submittal and New York State granting the money?
Typically, the grant applications close at the end of July, and there is an announcement in December, January-ish. And then we typically start contracting, if all goes well, in March. So that's a typical timeline. Okay. And as most of you know, we have switched over to the statewide financial system grants management system. There are certain roles that have to be filled before we can do anything in the system. So this is just an FYI. Make sure you know who your grants contract editor is at the community. Know who your contract collaboration person is. That's the person who's going to be working on the budget and the work plan and the contract in the statewide financial system. Know who your grants approver is. This is typically a municipal official legally authorized to enter into a contract with New York State. You do have to use the signatory's name, not their title, because that name generates an electronic signature, and you have to have a signature signed by a person, not a title. And there should be something like a grantee delegated administrator role, which is what it was called in Grants Gateway for your municipality. That person who should know who fills what role, because that's their job. Their job is to know who's in what role. If you get a new supervisor, they need to change that role to the new person, etc. So just be aware of that. Okay, getting into agreements, partnership agreements. So multiple municipalities or a municipality and a quasi-municipality or a municipality and a nonprofit can all work together to complete a project. Again, you want to identify who the partners are, what their roles are, what their responsibilities are, and what their financial contribution is or their match contribution is. Get that all down on paper. For the application, all you need is a letter of commitment. A draft or an executed MOU or joint resolution is stronger, but it's not necessary. We will ask that that agreement be executed before we execute the state assistance contract, however. There's also a climate change mitigation easement. This is required where a project occurs on property that's not owned by the applicant. So you could do a project on property that's not yours, but you do have to have this easement in place. It ensures that the property is going to provide a public benefit of climate mitigation or adaptation for a certain amount of time. The minimum, minimum is 10 years, but for certain projects, we will increase that to 20 or 30 years, depending on the useful life of the project. That easement also allows for the municipality to come in and do data collection and maintenance on the project. We do have a template again on our website, so you can take a look at what's required in a climate change mitigation easement. And I will say that there are certain entities that can't enter into a climate change mitigation easement, such as DOT. So if you're going to be putting a project in a DOT right away, like a sidewalk or something or a bike lane, you're going to have to sign a modified MOU with DOT that incorporates some of these climate change mitigation easement measures. And we will give you more information about that if your project does include that. We have a template for that too. Okay, the other thing I want to mention is you do have climate smart communities coordinators that are out there to help you with some of this, not only becoming certified, but also with the grants program, understanding the grants program. There's Capital Region, Central New York, Finger Lakes, Long Island, Mid-Hudson, Mohawk Valley, New York City. And then when we get out west, North Country's got more than one, Western New York's got more than one. And this is our contact information. And again, so if you want to contact us, this is our website to our grants page. The CSC grants is the email to get in touch with me and the grants team for questions. Climate Smart NY is the website for the certification program, and Climate Smart at DEC is the email for Dazzle and the certification team. And then there's our general phone number. So say you had a refrigerant question, you could call that general number, ask for the mitigation section, and talk to somebody over there about a specific refrigerant question.
Myra, we have another question.
All righty. I was just
It's
going to
on
say,
res-
any final questions?
It's on resolution requirement. Can you review updated guidance on providing a formal letter for municipalities that do not yet have a resolution from a legislative body?
Okay, so the letter is for, how do I explain this? If your municipal board is the authorizing entity, you have to have a resolution. The letter is for mostly counties, but a few cities have this issue as well, is that in the charter that created the city or the county, it basically says XYZ person is authorized to enter into contracts with the state. Sometimes there's resolutions that are passed that allow that will say, okay, this resolution or this section of our charter says this, I don't know, the director of planning is allowed to enter into contracts with the state. So it's whatever legal, the letter has to be accompanied with whatever legal thing you have that takes the authority out of the hands of the municipal governing board and gives it to somebody else. Because our statute says that it has to be your application has to be authorized by the governing board. So if you have a governing board and they're responsible, it's got to be a resolution from the governing board. If your statute or your, if you have like a city charter or some kind of, legal means that shifted that responsibility to somebody else, we need a copy of that to accompany your letter. So you can't just have a letter. That's basically what I'm trying to say. It's only under that circumstance where if you have the setup in your municipality that the authority has been given to someone else, you can include the letter and a copy of that authority shifting to that specific person or entity or title that's listed in your letter. Okay. Anything else?
We've got a question. What exactly is a governing board?
The governing board is the basically the executives of your municipality. So if you're in a town, you likely have a town supervisor and a town board. If you're a village, you probably have a mayor, and you could have a village board, or you might have village trustees. For counties, you have the county executive and the county legislators. So it really depends on your municipality and how it's structured, but those are the typical ones. All right. Okay, well, thanks everybody for attending. I appreciate you being here with us. If you have any questions, feel free to call or email us, and I look forward to seeing your applications in a couple weeks. Have a good day.